Hey guys, so this is going to be a really quick and dirty lecture over impression formation. Okay, so really quickly, so we've already talked about attribution. What is impression formation? So when we meet a person for the first time, we create a mental representation of that individual, which basically we create a schema for that individual. This includes all the expectations that we would have for how that person is going to behave, and it includes assumptions of internal certain dispositional features, or such as internal motives, personality traits, things of that nature. So our impression is basically our schema for an individual, and we create it basically as soon as we start interacting with someone, sometimes even before, all right? Or at least potentially even before. So that's what an impression is. Well, we find that we form these impressions very quickly, within a fifth of a second. All right, people, according to some work by Willis and Todorov, we can form these impressions within a fifth of a second. All right, so very quick. Now they do change, or at least they can, but we will talk about that in a little bit. So when we're informing these impressions, what kinds of things do these impressions kind of focus on, or what do they revolve around? Well, a couple dimensions or domains have been found to be central to all impressions, okay? And those domains are warmth and competence. You might also see these known as labeled as communion and agency. All right. Now, warmth and warmth or communion often breaks down into sociability. So, you know, how agreeable are you? So how likely are you to engage with others? How much do you enjoy talking to other people? And then morality. So how honest, okay, are you? And then competency, or agency. How capable are you at doing what you're trying to do? Okay, and even among those two dimensions, even though they tend to be universal, there tends to be a warmth tends to have precedence. So we worry about whether or not someone wants to hurt us, whether they're warm or not, before we worry about can they actually do it. Okay, so if you're warm with me, then you being competent is a bonus. All right, but if you're cold with me, then you being competent is a danger. All right, because if you don't like me and you're good at what you do, then you can really interfere with my life. Okay, so even though these two dimensions are universal dimensions around which most impressions revolve, warmth tends to have precedence among the two. Now, when we don't have much evaluative information about a person, according to the evaluative space model, we tend to have what's called a positivity offset, meaning that we tend to give people kind of the benefit of the doubt at first. So if you look at people's impressions, and the evaluative space model with regards to first impressions was discussed by Ito and Cacioppo, and you can check that out if you want. Just Ito, ITO, and Cacioppo. CACIOPPO, I think. Anyway, so when we don't have much evaluative information about a person, we give them the benefit of the doubt, and we think slightly positively about them. We think we will rate them slightly higher on positive traits. Now, Ito and Cacioppo have argued that indicates that early in impression formation, or at least when evaluative information is low, our positive or approach motivational system is more influential in the impressions we form. However, as the relationship increases or grows older, the negative or avoidance motivational system becomes more influential, and they use this to explain what is commonly referred to as the negativity bias, or specifically the effect of the negativity bias on impression formation. In general, humans have a negativity bias. So, for example, if you were to lose $100, the intensity of that negative experience would be more intense than the intensity of the positive experience of gaining $100. The departure from your current state is the same. You lose $100 or you gain $100. The movement is still $100, but the direction changes the intensity. If you're losing, it's felt as more impactful than if you're gaining an equivalent amount. Okay, that's kind of our negativity bias. Well, the same thing happens in our impressions. So when we know a person and they do something bad, that drives our impression of them way down. And it's really difficult for them to recover from that. All right, again, because as our relationship with those individuals grow older, the negative information gets weighted more heavily. Now, of course, this isn't true, across the board. For example, warmth domain seems to really have this negativity bias. All right, so if you do something to impugn your warmth, or if a person does something to impugn their warmth to you, then that really drives down your impression of them. All right. However, positive information tends to be more diagnostic for for agency or for competence. Okay, so if you do something, if you start improving in your competence, that starts pushing up your a person's impression of you. Okay, so but in general, the average effect across all domains is negativity bias, meaning on average, negative information is weighted more heavily than positive information. All right. Now, I mentioned earlier that we would talk a little bit about whether or not impressions change. For a while, it was thought that if they did change, they changed very little, and if anything, really, people just became more confident in their impressions. But we have now found, especially with some work in implicit impressions, so the impressions that they may not necessarily be aware of, and not necessarily assessed using explicit measures, but instead are assessed using implicit measures, so reaction time measures, things like that. So, are you quicker at associating positive information with John, all right, than you are with associating negative information with John? If you're quicker at associating positive information with John, then you have a positive implicit impression of John. Okay, but if you're quicker at associating or pairing negative information with John, then you probably have a negative implicit impression of John. All right. So when do we change our impressions? Well, it depends on a number of things. First is pretty much all of it. Whether or not we change our impression primarily depends on whether or not you get new information. If you don't get new information, then there's no reason to change the impression. But once you get new information about a person, then whether or not you change your impression depends on certain features of that information. First, is that information good or bad? So again, remember, as I was talking earlier, on average, good information doesn't warrant changing an impression as much as new positive information doesn't warrant changing an impression as much as does new negative information does. All right. So if you get new positive information, you might pull up the impression a little bit, but not much. But if you get new negative information, it causes the impression to become more negative by quite a bit. All right. Second, is the information extreme? All right. Well, if you're getting new extreme negative information about the person, boy, it's going to plummet that impression far more than moderate negative information. And the same is true of positive. So if you get new extremely positive information about a person, it's going to pull up the information far better than moderately positive information. Is the information diagnostic? And this kind of goes with extremity. So by diagnostic, what I mean is the information that you're receiving, is this new information that you're receiving about the person, do you think that information tells you anything about that impression? All right, about that person. If you don't think that new information that you're getting is informative about that person or diagnostic, then you're not going to change your impression. But if you think the new information is highly diagnostic, you think that it really tells you something, then you're more likely to change. And then if something sparks you to reinterpret your impression. So, for example, in one study by Mann and Ferguson, they gave participants a fairly, I can't remember how many pieces of information, I think it was like 10 pieces of information, or 11 or something like that, and then they showed them a positive piece of information. But before they showed them that final positive piece of information, they measured their implicit impression. Lo and behold, most people had a negative impression of the individual. I don't remember the character's name, but just for the sake of this example, let's say that person's name was John. So after seeing these 9 or 10 pieces of information that were all negative about John, most people had a negative implicit impression of John. But after giving that positive information, that final positive piece of information, their impressions became more positive. Now they later, in a second study, manipulated whether that new piece of positive information led people to reframe the first 9 or 10 pieces of information they got. So, for example, the first 9 or 10 pieces of information were something like, John broke into a house, John removed some precious items, John broke glasses, or something like that. Broke down doors or something. And then in one condition, the condition in which the new information, the new positive information, led them to rethink the initial pieces of information they received, they were told that the reason he broke in was to save 2 kids, or save some people from a burning house. All right, so the only precious things he took were the people. And he was breaking, and it leads the person to reframe the information about him breaking down walls and doing all this other stuff because he's trying to get to them. All right, so it causes a reframing. It leads them to, so maybe I should rethink that. So it leads them to reevaluate their impression. But when they gave them, so in that second study, they either gave them that information, that positive information that led them to reframe it, or they gave them positive information that didn't give them a reason to reframe any of the negative stuff. So I think it was he saw a baby fall onto the subway tracks, and he saved the baby, okay, and jumped out of the way just in time. Now, yes, that is very positive, but at the same time, it doesn't lead them to reevaluate any of the negative information they just learned. It still doesn't explain why he was breaking into a house, why he was busting it up, why he was taking precious things, or even what the precious things were. It doesn't lead them to reevaluate that old negative information they had. And so what they found is that when people got the positive information that led them to reevaluate the first 9 or 10 pieces of information, their implicit impressions of John became more positive. But when they got positive information, but it didn't lead them to reevaluate, their impressions didn't become more positive. Their implicit impressions of John didn't become more positive. All right, so the information has to lead, or one element of the information is that the information has to lead a person to reevaluate previously learned information about the person. All right, and that's all I wanted to talk about. All right, if you have any questions about anything that I've discussed in either of the videos that I'm posting, be sure to send them my way via email, or swing by if you want. But that's all I have. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. I will see you tomorrow in class. I hope everybody's ready for the exam. I'm sure you're all going to do great. I'll see you then.